Howdy. This week we were looking at the gospel passage from Matthew 13, discussing the parable of the weeds. Now, in this, Jesus is saying that the kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field, but while his men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. Now, one of the things that Pastor Bauer brought up today is that our word that we translate into weeds is more specifically called tares. And so when we think of tares, they are very similar in appearance to wheat. They grow up, they get their roots entangled with the wheat, and it's very difficult to separate them out the way that we might think of weeds being separated out in today's context. And if you were to pull out the tares, it would actually tear the wheat out at the same time. But the problem with tares is that they don't bear grain the same way that wheat does. So while it's actually better in the context to let them grow up together, they're still going to have to be sifted out. They're still going to have to be weeded out. Now, why is this important in our parable? Because it shows us that in our context, we're going to find ourselves in the midst of not just troubles themselves, but troubled people, and also realizing that we ourselves end up acting like the tares that we are mixed in with. So we end up seeing multiple reasons why this becomes an issue, but at the same time, it's not one that we can end up avoiding and pretending that we can just sort ourselves out from it here and now. So oftentimes it's very easy for us to try to seclude ourselves away, to think that we're going to only hang out with good people or only hang out with Christian people or only do things in a certain way. But the reality is that sin is something that comes up in our own context, in our own formats. But the thing is that trying to separate ourselves out from it denies the truth that we know is that sin comes from within. And with this is that we end up also seeing that it talks about the mustard seed and how something so small has to grow up and it has to become this great tree for the when the garden plants and for the birds to come. And even the idea of the leaven growing and rising and becoming what it's meant to be in the flour. The thing is that we can't just assume that we can be done and finished and we can look at whatever we think we're supposed to be right here and right now and think that we've got it all figured out. It takes time because God is changing us. He's molding us. He's growing us. And the thing is that even as we are growing into the wheat that we're meant to be because of His Word, we can't pretend that we're not surrounded by darkness and by things that will try to pull us away. The idea of those who represent what is evil, those who want to live for, breaking what is good and living for what is wrong. The thing is that our lives are going to be affected by that until Jesus comes again. And there's no changing that. But we can still recognize our identity as being the wheat, as being the ones that God has called, to be the ones who bear grain, who are fruitful, who matter. Because at the end of the day, is that while it is that we might be able to think of ourselves as, well, we're just mixed in with the tares, so either we want to pretend that they're not there or that we can separate ourselves out, or other times we might just say, you know what, maybe I'm just one of them as well. But the reality is that we have to still be who we've been called to be, even when they're in the midst of it, and even when we want to pretend that we're not. So as we listen today to Pastor Bauer's sermon, we want to keep this in mind as we think of Jesus' words in the parable.